Before we dive into today's episode, a quick update if bloating has been something you have been struggling with. Enrollment is officially open for the Bloat-Free Method, my 6-week group coaching program designed to help reduce bloating without restriction, food fear, or overthinking every single meal. This program focuses on the daily habits that actually support digestion, so bloating becomes calmer and more predictable over time. There are only 12 spots total available, and once they're filled, enrollment will close. If this feels like the support you've been looking for, you can learn more and enroll now by clicking the link in the show notes. Now, let's get into today's episode. Are you tired of feeling like your stomach has its own agenda? Like the bloating, gas, or constant trips to the bathroom are running your life? Welcome to the Beyond Bloated podcast, the podcast where we tackle those frustrating gut issues head on, without strict diets or giving up your favorite foods. I'm Carly, a certified gut health coach who's been there, struggling with bloating that made me look 6 months pregnant, gut pain that kept me from enjoying meals, and fatigue so draining it felt impossible to get through the day. Now, I help women like you find freedom from those symptoms and take back control of their lives. Each week, we'll debunk gut health myths, dive into simple, actionable tips, and hear stories from women who've been exactly where you are. It's time to feel confident, energized, and bloat-free. Let's get started. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Beyond Bloated podcast, or welcome for the very first time. When I was struggling with my own gut health, my symptoms were straight up ruining my life. Food sensitivities, stomach pain, bloating, diarrhea, fatigue, chronic infections, the whole list. Somehow, some way, I did dodge the skin symptoms. But sadly, so many of my clients don't. They come to me for their digestive issues, and they're also dealing with acne, rosacea, or eczema. Time and time again, once we start supporting their gut and nervous system, their skin starts to clear too. Today's guest knows this connection better than almost anyone because she lived it. I'm joined by Christa Biegler, an award-winning dietitian, nutritionist, host of the Less Stressed Life podcast, and author of the Eczema Relief Diet and Cookbook. Christa helps health-savvy women overcome eczema, food sensitivities, and fatigue without restriction, endless testing, or supplement overload. Her work is all about giving your body what it truly needs to function optimally, so you can feel more in control, more free, and a whole lot less stressed. She also has a deep passion for subclinical thyroid issues, the nervous system, and uncovering those sneaky root causes that often get overlooked in traditional care. I know you're going to love her practical, down-to-earth approach to gut and skin health. So without further ado, let's give a big warm welcome to Christa Biegler. Thank you so much for joining us on the Beyond Bloated podcast today.
Thanks for having me, Carly.
As always, I like to kick these episodes off by letting you share your story. What got Christa into the eczema world, and how do you pronounce the word?
Yeah, I find people say it multiple ways. I just say eczema, but some people say eczema. Also, we use the word atopic dermatitis sometimes, but I just use the word eczema, and I actually don't get too attached to the diagnostic terms. I feel like there's a ton of overlap between psoriasis. Now, usually you get a biopsy for diagnostic purposes, but I find that there's a ton of overlap between psoriasis and there are some other kind of rogue or lesser known diagnoses like Grover's disease, etc. And they pretty much, if we get into typing this overall topic, there's just a ton of overlap. And for me, all symptoms are just signals. And so they all kind of point back to a priority system or what you need to love on in your body to clear the symptoms. So all that to say, my story started around a decade ago. I thought that I had genetic dry skin. And I should say that in air quotes because my sisters had some dry skin along the hairline. I thought it just happened in the winter. I didn't think much of it because, we're forced to change when we're inspired or desperate, and usually it's desperate. And this was not a moment of desperation for me, way back in high school a million years ago. But I did know my sisters had the same symptoms, so I just assumed that's how it was. And so this really wasn't a big bother until I was going through, not surprisingly, a stressful time of life. I was changing careers. I had 2 toddlers, and I had taken my kids to the swimming pool 5 days in a row. And on the last day, I woke up with a rash all over my eyes and my neck, and my face. So this was abnormal and it was red and angry and very painful. And I'm positive there were many whispers from my body before. Like I had never had perfect gut health. I actually thought I was the picture of gut health because I was drinking a lot of kombucha about 12 years ago, like it was my job. So I thought I was the picture of gut health because of fermented foods and DI wine and things like that. But actually, I had kind of created a mess. And this was peculiar for me because previously this dry skin had really presented in the winter and been, relegated to like certain hairline areas, whereas this was like a full-on angry rash in the middle of the summer. And so I did what any sane person would do. I looked for someone else to fix it for me because I didn't know what the heck to do at that time. I was not in private practice in functional medicine. I was just starting to maybe consider dabbling into some food sensitivity stuff because as a dietitian by trade, I thought changing your diet was pretty cool. I was like, just loved food. It sounded fun. And so I had also, as one does, we get excited about tests that might tell us something. So around this same time, I'd also done a food sensitivity test and then promptly been disappointed because it was flagging all my favorite foods. It's a pretty sure sign of gut permeability. And I did what is the wrong thing to do, which is put it on the fridge and forget about it for a month because food sensitivities are quite transient. And so somewhere in this like blur of a couple of months where all of these things happened, I decided, let me implement this food sensitivity protocol with this crazy rash. And I remember it actually made things worse. How fun for me, right? I
Hmm.
remember if we change our diet without a plan, usually that results in being hungry. And so I remember, and you know who the worst person is to prescribe a diet change to is a dietitian. They're actually the worst clients for this topic. And again, I don't even do that kind of stuff anymore, typically most of the time. And I think there's a time and a place for different things and a lot of ways to go about it. But I'm sharing this hopefully relatable story. And so I remember sticking my hand in a bag of pecans because I was rummaging through the pantry for some foods I could eat when I was on this pretty restrictive temporary food protocol. And I put the pecans in my mouth, and a few minutes later, my eyes started swelling. And I was like, what in the heck is going on? I've never had a food allergies. I've never had a food reaction like this to anything. And so I'd actually created more of a response for the first time with this. So there's a lot of ups and downs to this story. I wanted to find someone to help me. I really struggled to find anyone that knew anything about skin stuff. I was getting a lot of generic toolboxes. I saw a famous gut health doctor online. He had me do a couple of stool tests that were unremarkable, as we would call them medically. And he said you could do nothing or you could do this protocol, which meant I didn't see him again. Because
Yeah, good
he
call.
did not validate how I was feeling at that time. But my takeaway was that I really had trouble finding someone to help. I went to a lot of different providers, had a lot of different experiences. I walked out of offices with $700 worth of supplements, and all of those are important experiences because they all shape who you become in the future. And what I ultimately had to do was dig into a lot of research and trial and error. And then I finally started to crawl out of this hole of food sensitivities about 2 months later by starting to like correct what was going on in my gut. I got lucky in some ways, right? I was very research led at that time. I got lucky supporting different systems, primarily what was going on in the gut and drainage systems. And if you think about the physiology of skin, which we can talk about, of course, that makes a lot of sense. But we should talk about that regardless, because we, of course, think it's a topical issue at first, right? We're like, we naturally go to what is obvious to us. Back pain, I go to someone structurally, right? Skin stuff, I do something topical. But unfortunately, it's double the trouble, it's double the work. It's an internal and an external job. It took me a little longer than I would have liked to clear that first experience with eczema. And not too many months after I cleared it, I was presenting to a mom group of eczema moms about different types of food reactions, food sensitivities, allergies, and tolerances. And a couple of moms asked me to help their kids with food stuff and eczema, and the rest was history because they were amazing. It worked. And the more I tried to not talk about eczema, or not put it on my website or not advertise for it, the more people walked through the door with skin issues because they were probably having the problem I was having, which was no one really, until you deal with it yourself, there's this visceral knowledge that you get, right? This very tangible embodiment that you understand when you have dealt with the symptom yourself. I understood that you did not buy black. right? Because your skin might flake off on your shirt. I just like would not do that at that time. That's a big, long story, but that's it in a nutshell, how this all began. And then it has kind of just blossomed from there. And I've learned, I always like to credit my clients because we learn the most through helping them and starting to see patterns emerge and starting to do things differently. Because unfortunately, our toolbox is extremely shallow for skin issues. So there's a lot of opportunity here as practitioners because it's a very large population of people that are affected. It's somewhere between 5 and 10% of adults and 10 to 20% of kids are affected by eczema, which is like a very large, very, very large number of population for not to have too many people working in it. And this is my opinion, right? I don't feel like there's enough people working in it. I feel like I can maybe fill 1.5 hands of people I know that like really focus on this topic. But I think, in this episode alone today, we can uncover a lot of things.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I mean, we were talking earlier, and I mentioned I had my own gut health journey that didn't give me skin issues, but I had a lot of other issues. And even so, your story was still very relatable to me. I also started with the food sensitivity test that lit up like a Christmas tree. And my naturopath said, stop eating 40,000 foods. And I was like, what do I do? So not like panic. And I did. I eliminated them all. I was very strict with my diet for years. For years, I did this. And I just kept restricting further and further and further. And I was like, why aren't I better? I stopped eating food,
Yeah.
like what now? So, regardless of skin issues, gut issues, restrictive diets, like it's very relatable to anyone listening. But if you're listening, you likely have skin issues, which is why you are tuning into the eczema episode. So, could you tell us more about what is the difference between like eczema, rosacea? How do you know you have eczema? Is there even a difference? And you also mentioned different types. So, maybe just the eczema 411 so people know what they're dealing with.
Okay, pause for a second. Have you taken my bloat personality quiz yet? It's totally free and honestly, freakishly accurate. This quick 2-minute quiz will help you figure out exactly which habits and patterns are behind your bloating, the ones no one ever talks about, and it gives you personalized, simple steps you can start using today to feel less bloated and more comfortable in your jeans. If you've ever wondered, why am I always bloated, even when I eat healthy, this quiz is your first clue. Head to beyondbloated.com/bloat-personality-quiz, or the link is in the show notes. Take the quiz and then send me your result. I love seeing which bloat personality everyone gets. Now, let's get back to the show.
Sure. Well, I can talk about diagnosis lightly. I'm not a diagnostic practitioner like a dermatologist, and I don't really care too much about the diagnosis. But rosacea typically shows up on the face as kind of just red face, sometimes the cheeks. It's very much related in the literature to having small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, which is, only half the story, of course. Eczema and psoriasis is characterized a little bit differently, and they usually do a biopsy. There's like plaques, etc. I find a ton of overlap. People sometimes come in and they say, first they diagnosed me with psoriasis, and then they diagnosed me with eczema. I was like, I don't really care. I just want to know how it's acting. So that kind of takes me to the types, which I was telling you offline. Like, you're probably not going to find somewhere else because I made these up based on patterns that I saw in clients, and they absolutely are true. They absolutely are. And this is the issue, is that we treat skin issues the same. Our toolbox is steroids, typically, and then going to like $3,000 a month biologics, at least in the US. I don't know what it's like in Canada. I imagine the toolbox is pretty much the same, but maybe cost differences and different things. Every once in a while, there's an infection in there. And I will just say right now, this is a huge opportunity when something is infected. And this is important, I guess. Let me say this. In the literature, what we do agree about universally, conventionally, and functionally, and integratively, and alternatively, is that there is a presence of Staphylococcus aureus overgrowth bacteria topically on the skin, present in eczema. Where does that come from? The inside. I have never run a stool test on someone with eczema that did not have an overgrowth of Staph aureus. But guess what? That wasn't the only one. It was also other pathogens. Maybe it was, and I shouldn't even label them because they take so much. I think that they require some lip service, certain words you say, and it's like, nope, I need to qualify that. But there are many other weeds, you might say, get overgrown in the gut, and the skin grows from the inside out. And while you didn't have skin issues and I had skin issues, we're a little bit different from a genetic makeup. That other big system that must be involved with skin is drainage, because the skin is a drainage system overall. It's the largest drainage organ. Other drainage organs would be the liver, the kidneys, the lymphatics, which is kind of that superficial, somewhat fluid, right? Whereas you might have had gut issues and seen food sensitivities. You know, someone else I work with, when she gets gut issues, she's going to see an increase in anxiety and other things. And so it can look a little bit differently based on our own unique genetic programming. For me personally, I'm not genetically blessed related to liver, genetics, etc. That looks like a lot of cancer in my extended family, in my opinion. It looks like on a more simple level, maybe sensitivity to smell, maybe saying, oh, I have sensitive skin. I think we don't always think about that. We've just kind of adjusted our life to buy unscented things. Sometimes maybe there's something related to how we sweat. We don't sweat. We sweat a lot. We've got body odor, something like that. Like that can be all over the place. For me, when my drainage and detox is congested, I don't jump out of bed beautifully in the morning. Like I'm not full of energy in the morning. So it can be kind of nuanced overall. So for some people, there can even be intermittent joint pain as well, especially waking up, and it gets better throughout the day. Classical drainage related to lymphatics, things getting stuck in that fluid. So when we're talking about the genesis of eczema in general, we ultimately agree about this overgrowth of bacteria. I'm letting you know clinically for a decade, I've seen that overgrowth of bacteria, but much, much, much more. Generally, dysbiosis. It could be bacterial, it could be fungal, it could be even some other types of pathogens, maybe even single-cell protozoas, things like that. All of that creates imbalances in the gut, things you probably talk about a lot. And then digestion is impaired. And so skin issues are a digestion issue. They are a gut health issue, but they're also another layer. They're also a drainage issue overall. And then they can also have another layer, a stress layer. And so all of these are the three types. I call them the inflammatory type, the environmental type, and the stress-mediated type. And here's how they present in general. And they're sort of, I want you to think about them like a layered cake, because you might have the first layer, but if you have the second layer, you have both layers. If you have the third layer, you usually have all three layers. And so they really just point to systems and opportunities and what to support first to get the most results the fastest. Because if we just come in and do the same thing on everybody, you will miss some of the nuance of how it's presenting. Because some people will come in and it's like here and it's red and it's angry. And some people will come in and it's here and it's dry and it's scaly. And some people will come in and it's on their hands. And so the story of how it started, the presentation of what it's doing and how it looks all matters to direct you to prioritizing. And I think prioritizing obviously saves us a lot of time, which is something we're all looking for when we're trying to heal, right? Okay,
Absolutely.
So let's talk about how this inflammatory type looks. This is going to be most common in children. Most children's eczema is inflammatory style type. So it's very gut mediated. And what that looks like is usually red and rashy and angry. It usually looks better in the morning and worse in the evening, or it gets worse with like hot baths, with heat, things like that. So very histamine driven overall. I would say that if it's in round patches, it's also in this category for sure. A lot of times with kids, it's in their elbows and behind their knees. And then it kind of, what can happen very commonly is you might have it as a child. I always like to ask people this question. You might have it as a child, you might outgrow it, and then it may come back in college, but now we've got a new layer, and usually it's got some dry flakiness to it as well. So this environmental type of eczema, which is me, so I had definitely both layers, was maybe it's going to show up around your eyes, very much related to drainage, liver detoxification in traditional Chinese medicine. It's going to be more dry and flaky. Why would that be? I base a lot of things on physiology, because when we rely on physiology, like, we've got to be right. We recognize physiology as the truth, right? Like the anatomy and how the body is actually working. So when the liver is making bile breaks down fatty acids, and then the body takes those fatty acids and uses them to shuttle around nutrients and also to make beautiful lipid membranes around the cells. So I think about this, and if it's not able to do that for different reasons, like it's not producing bile well, which is completely an issue, it's underperforming in that way, or inflammation is using up some of the lipid membrane layer, inflammation will literally it needs to be countered by things like omega-3s, which make up that lipid layer, then all of that will be a challenge. And I like you to imagine a dry lawn in Arizona that is all dry and cracked. You can't get seeds into it. And we want our skin to be like a field in Wisconsin, like rich and fertile, or like it has a nice lipid layer and like seeds go right in. And those seeds you can liken to nutrients. And so the issue is that when those lipid membranes are really dry, you've now got, when every cell membrane is really dry and you can't get nutrients in, and then also those cells make up tissue. And so now you've got dry skin overall. And so I think we should start reconditioning ourselves when we see dryness. How can we hydrate from the inside out? And that's going to be a big conversation about minerals and lipid membranes for sure. But in general, it's also liver and drainage health in general, because if we think about bile and if that's not being made very well, bile's made in the liver, stored in the gallbladder, we're not going to break down those fatty acids and make those lipid layers. And so it just kind of makes sense that those would be the next layer. And I think also as time goes on, or we've had something longer, this layer becomes more prevalent in general, just because we add kind of layers of complexity. We live in sort of this like imperfect world, I'll say. And so we have a lot of toxic burden coming in. The smallest amounts of things you put in the skin have to be detoxed to the liver. I had kind of a rude awakening about this recently. I was trying some new copper face serum from a popular supplement company I definitely trust. And their bottle, I had bought a couple products because I wanted to test them. I'm a mad tester of things, of products. And the label was black, very small writing, couldn't really read it. And I thought they had actually mislabeled the product because it said 0.25 milligrams of estrogen in this product. And I was like, oh, they mislabeled this from a different product. I had to look at it like 6 times because I started to use that on a Friday. I was supposed to get my period on a Sunday. I did not get it, which was very abnormal. I was like, oh my gosh, I'm in perimenopause. And by Tuesday, I had reviewed this label again. And I was like, oh my gosh, it really did have estrogen at the very bottom of the list. And so this teeny tiny pump of stuff I put on my skin with the tiniest bit of estrogen was signaling to my body to not have my own period, because it was like, oh, there's trace amounts of estrogen left over. So I just tell you this story because it's like, this is the power of what you put on your body. It's actually alarming. It's actually a little bit crazy. It's like, wow, it really does have to be cleared by the liver, everything you put on and in your body. So it makes sense that we would just add this layer. Now, there's a third type. And I think that this one has become more prevalent and more of an issue in the last 5 years. I think since 2020, we now have a lot more hypersensitivity, people feeling like I'm reacting to everything that I put on. Things light up like a Christmas tree. And then also, and I think there's kind of a double whammy here, but also I saw a kind of quite an influx of hand eczema in general. So I find hand eczema is typically the stress-mediated form of eczema, not meaning when you just control your stress, you will take care of it. You actually need to deal with all the layers. But I find that the stress hormones need to be cared for more than the other layers. Not that they always couldn't be cared for, that's not a problem. But usually when we get to this layer, this hypersensitivity, you've really got to love on those stress hormones, the adrenals, the thyroid, etc. And I think that this all relates a ton to relapse prevention as well, which is a huge area I'm super passionate about, because if the thyroid is a little bit sluggish and it won't show up in blood labs, you'll have motility will slow down. And I call this like the bird bath effect. That means you're not going to, move things through very well. And so you're going to maybe have some dysbiosis start to form. Digestion might slow down in general with slower motility. And so we'll usually see a relapse of overall digestive stuff or imbalance in digestion, which may show up on the skin. And so anyway, total side note about relapse prevention there, but something I'm really interested in because I think everyone wants to fix something and then slam the door shut and then never deal with it again. But I think understanding our systems and how they work together and how they really interplay with each other are pretty darn important. And so the thyroid does come up here and there because the thyroid is metabolized finally or last through the liver as well. And so, some of the symptoms of sluggish thyroid include dry skin and dry hair and things like that, probably because there's that relationship with that bile function and how we're breaking down and using fatty acids, et cetera, and just the overall dry skin. So that was my very brief version of how I might type eczema, but that is just telling me what systems are going to need to be supported. Is it going to be one system, one or two systems? Am I going to add some extra support to this system to really move the needle on that? Or am I going to need to support all of these systems, and in what order, essentially? Because that changes the game. What I see a lot is people coming in from, first of all, I love Eastern Asian medicine, but I see a lot of people coming in from, traditional Chinese medicine or practitioners or something, and they'll say, I was just getting worse. And what I find there is we're not always doing things as gently as we could do. We're maybe not putting the nutrients back at the machine that needs to work. Maybe we're just hitting straight to herbs instead of doing any nutrient work. And the body's very nutrient dependent. I love herbs as well, but the body's extremely nutrient dependent. And so if you do things kind of out of order, the tricky thing with skin is that you can make things worse. And so our goal is to not do that. And that's kind of the difference between someone who knows anything about skin and who doesn't, is like, you've experienced this or you've seen it in your clients. It's like, let's actually just not provoke this onto your skin. Let's just be a little more gentle. Let's be effective, but let's do it in an order that cleans up after itself, that doesn't provoke it on the skin, because this doesn't make anyone happy. So it's a little bit of a symphony. It's a little bit of a tango and a dance. But knowing how your skin is acting, how it's responding, what it's responding to topically, which is slightly less important, but can be good information. All of these give you clues about what's going on and what system to support the most.
Very cool. I love that you have your own, like, from experience too. It's not like you just made this up. You have seen it many times. You dealt with it yourself. You have helped many, many clients through this, and now you have a system that works. And there's layers to eczema as there is with any digestive issue, right? Like if you have other gut issues like food sensitivities, candida overgrowth, whatever it may be, there's a reason why it's happening. So it's basically get to the root of why is this happening, start to address it. And stress is a massive one for so many issues that we all deal with. Putting things on your skin that are toxic for your body is obviously going to contribute. Even like you mentioned, that little bit of estrogen, that's crazy how it impacted your cycle.
Yeah, that was such a good experience for me. Like, oh, oops, the daisies. I just didn't, it was like crazy because it was shrink wrapped. And so until I took the shrink wrap off, like the shrink wrap was, creased. And it was like the writing was so tiny. I can read tiny writing, but it was just like I just missed it multiple times and thought, oh, this company, this is a new product. They mislabeled it.
Yeah.
So funny.
You're not going to think it's going to impact your cycle as much as it did, which is, like you said, really cool to learn.
Yeah, it's a good experience.
So,
all experiences are good experiences.
Yes, truly. So with all that being said, if someone is struggling with eczema, whether it be on their hand or on their face or wherever it may be, would you recommend they get tested to see what nutrients they are deficient in? Or do you feel like that's not necessary and there's a better approach? What would be your starting line?
Yeah. I did a lot of testing for a decade. And last year I started asking, so this is, I want to give you this context for the answer. So after you've done things for a while, and I'm really big on pattern recognition, there are some things that don't test very well. I've done a lot of different nutrient testing. I actually wish nutrient testing was a little more accessible and easier and more straightforward. There are some options out there for sure. I did a lot of nutrient testing for a long time. But anyway, I did a lot of testing for a decade, and that is wonderful. But last year I started to ask myself questions like, how could I help people get results faster? And then there was several other things I wanted to solve for as well. I was like, how can we help make things more accessible, etc. And to answer that first question, I was like, well, I could quit waiting, a month to get test results back and just get started based on the most common patterns we see. Because the reality is, I'm fine with stool testing, but about 50% of the time it's going to show you something really interesting, and 50% of the time it's not going to show you something interesting. And I'm not going to do what that doctor did to me over 10 years ago, right? Like, this is just not going to happen. I'm not going to tell someone like, well, there's nothing wrong with you. Not an issue. I'm going to go ahead and address what I think is normally the issue here based on physiology, based on experience. And that works pretty damn well. So I just go ahead and get started these days, but I do educate. So I take an education first approach. I never would restrict testing. What's tricky these days, it's very interesting. In the last handful of years, people come to me now after seeing several other people and already doing some decent tests. And so I don't always necessarily need another one. So it's fine. There's nothing wrong with doing that. That's totally acceptable. After you see something where you're like, I'm okay. I'm fine if I don't. So I try to utilize testing dollars as conservatively as possible. Sometimes I might use them if I'm looking for, I see a ton of mild to moderate mycotoxin exposure in skin stuff, which makes sense because it's really taxing to the drainage system. It's really taxing. It looks like candida overgrowth, but just more aggressive, essentially. It also taxes the adrenals and the stress system. So it sort of breaks everything pretty nicely. And it's a huge issue for skin issues. So I might check that because I just consider, I try to take a really chill approach to this. Like it's important and it's not worth having massive nervous system responses forever. This is just a skill. And I always say to people, we had a record hailstorm 3 years ago, and I had 4 water intrusions that year. These are skills. The end, you know. Okay, so your question was, what would I do with testing when I do comprehensive micronutrient testing? I used to do comprehensive micronutrient testing on everyone, and one of the negatives, or one of the things that I've tried to solve for now, is that you can get incredible results doing that. The reality is, if you're not digesting and absorbing nutrients, of course, as you know, you're going to be deficient in nutrients in general, and that will look like slower skin healing typically. And so as you start to replete nutrients in general, you will heal faster generally. Even if you have a little bit of something, you will typically heal faster. Your energy will also be better, etc. I have gone to a synergistic approach to nutrients because what I was seeing after doing a lot of micronutrient testing for a long time, and I think there's like, you could be talked into one thing versus the other. One of the negatives is that, and I adore some of the synergy and like the patterns and the things they actually tell you. I think it was super fun detective work. But the negative is if you put someone on a supplement, depending on like it's very possible people try to stay on things, right? And so I tend to just go with a more synergistic approach, whereas like here are the nutrients you need to even make these systems work. Why don't we just like put those in? And I like to go with things that work for pretty much everybody, right? Like just don't cause an issue for people. I generally more subscribe to like root cause protocol type approach with nutrients now because it not dogmatically whatsoever, but generally I'm more into some of the synergy discussed there, where it's like if you're just taking isolated vitamin D, I do think there's a very generic toolbox in the natural world, and it consists of vitamin D and zinc and probiotics and maybe omegas. And when I see that, I know that you are on the most generic toolbox of all time that's not very strategic. And I just want to talk about those. And so when you take vitamin D in isolation, you're creating a vitamin A deficiency over time and some other things. You can also shove calcium into the tissue and actually cause some of that thyroid sluggishness. That vitamin A is essential for immune system health. And so vitamin D needs to be with cofactors, or maybe you don't just need to stay on it. Like maybe you just don't really need to be on it like crazy. With zinc, it's going to deplete copper, which is essential for making ATP and energy, and also the iron recycling system. With probiotics, I think it's totally fine to try probiotics first. If you're successful, then congratulations. I'm super happy for you. Those people don't walk into my office. Sometimes they walk in, they're like, I made this yogurt somebody said online and I got way worse. And I was like, yeah, there's a lot of histamine producing probiotics. And so they will make all the symptoms worse. Histamine is a natural neurotransmitter that is impaired from breaking down and being cleared by the body when you've got stuff going on in your gut and your drainage is congested. And so it sort of like makes a mess. It sort of looks like a lot of things. It can look like anxiety, can look like the skin looking worse after a hot bath. It can look like allergy symptoms. It can look like lots of things. What else from that list? And then omega-3s. I don't really have an issue with omega-3s. It's just it's a matter of expense and how much people take, and is it actually making a difference and all those things. So I like to be effective when I'm doing things. I like to take efficacious doses. I like to be synergistic. And I think when we're synergistic and we support systems, we get to be on fewer supplements overall. So to answer your question, and wrap it with a bow on, do I do testing? And by the way, I did move to hair tissue mineral analysis like a number of years ago, maybe 5 or 6 years ago, from other comprehensive micronutrient testing, because it showed me patterns with adrenal function and thyroid function, et cetera, that we were not seeing on blood tests otherwise. And it was more of a supportive, synergistic approach. And certainly I would still tell some people like that can be a great method, but I think just even getting started with putting nutrients back in a very synergistic way is very good. But that's my approach based on experience at this point. I certainly did a lot of testing before, and I just was like, well, you know what? I can pretty much tell you what this test is going to say at this point, or support the most, it's like it's sort of a game. Like, how can we be strategic and streamline and do the thing that helps the most people and makes it the easiest and helps them get started right away. And so I just went with that. And
Yeah,
people are pretty happy with that too.
I completely agree. I personally don't use testing in my own practice because, like you said, when you've seen it a million times on repeat, you kind of know what to start with, what to look for. And I was someone who did all the tests and did all the supplements. And ultimately, it wasn't the answer for me. It honestly stressed me out more and it kind of gave me confusing information. And I had information and it's like, now what? And then I was
Mm-hmm.
hyper focused on it. So I have never used testing in my practice. I'm not anti-test. I think if you want to get it done, go for it. But the GI map cost me $800. I'm not going to force anybody to do that if they
Mm-hmm.
don't want to, and I don't think it's necessary in a lot of cases. So I hear you, and I think you're right. You know, when you've seen it so many times, you kind of know where to start. So with that, could you leave us with 1 to 2 things that someone struggling with eczema could start with without having to do a test?
Yeah, I think that the first step for everything is assessment. And so I like to start to look for patterns. So we kind of started with pattern exercise types in general. Another thing I recommend people do is generally some inventories. And sometimes people get frustrated by this because maybe they've kept a food diary or something in the past. That's not exactly what I mean. I mean, it's really nice to have an overall something I would call a red flag is if someone thought their only symptom was skin issues. They're really missing the boat on opportunity. And I don't really like that because one of my main ways I like to measure progress is looking at the total number of symptoms and then seeing that decline and decline, every single month, essentially. I want to see all symptoms improving. And so you can take an initial benchmark or baseline by Googling multiple symptom questionnaire, and you can find some different good long questionnaires. None of these are usually diagnoses, they're just all simple symptoms. This is something, when I broke out in my massive rash, a little over a decade ago. I wasn't attuned to all these other things that were going on with me that could be better. I just thought they were normal, like the throat clearing or, like itchy ears or something like that. I didn't realize that all of those were not normal. They were just common. And so by taking an initial inventory, it shows you that there's a lot of other opportunities because sometimes your skin isn't the first thing that heals. And so sometimes, especially if we need to make sure we are committed, right? And we need to have things we can like latch onto is what I would say. And so it's nice to see all of those symptoms because I want you to know like all of those can be improved and cleared. So that would be first, because I think the first step is always assessment. And then from there, when I'm picking two, it's kind of hard because I'm like, well, there's so many options. Let me talk about something that I always tell people as well. I always ask them to assess for infection as well, because anytime there's an infection, hard stop, you're never going to make a difference internally. Sorry, it's like your house is burning down and you're trying to put drywall on. It just does not. Like, game over, the end. Like you always must stop an infection first. So a little bit of context about that. If it's looking like oozing, if it's looking quite severe, it's a really good sign to do something about infection. You can go have it cultured at the dermatologist's office. I don't discourage you from doing that. That's totally fine. Some people have a negative culture and they do topical antimicrobials or topical antibiotics, which I don't think topical antibiotics are the end of the world. I think that internal antibiotics are more, I mean, even though putting stuff on your skin, but the thing is like if there's an infection, it's like your skin barrier is not going to heal anyway. So it's like there's lesser of evils and it's like you actually need relief always. And this is a big deal for sleep as well. I always say like I'm just a person who's like never going to shame someone. And so, if someone needs to use a steroid at the very beginning to sleep while they're working through things, I think like sleep is essential because you also have your lymphatic detox and all the detoxification that happens overnight. And a lot of times people have disrupted sleep because of itching. And so whatever we can do topically. Now, there's lots of other options too. Castor oil can work for multiple hours, but assessing like when people come into working with me, one, I have them prioritize which place we're going to start. So we talked about the eczema types. I triage it down to two things. Essentially, are we going to have to start with stress hormone stuff, or can we get right into gut and drainage stuff based on like, are you hypersensitive, etc. So I do that first. And then I also have them assess for one, infections, two, clean up, like get rid of any oral supplements that they just don't really need, clean up their topical stuff as well. Like I don't do too much there, but all these things people think are the most important. I kind of go through all of that stuff first. And before anyone works with someone, and this is normal, and probably if you're listening to this, you did these things, it's always okay to clean up the environment. I would say that and sorry, you were asking for two things, but I was like, oh man, there's a lot of potential options. First, I always think that generally before anyone gets to me, they've already cleaned up the basics, right? They've already cleaned up laundry, detergent, and scents in the home and all those things. And that's normal to do because whatever you can put less in the top of the funnel, it's less for the body to clear out. So I think that those are good. In assessing internal air quality, et cetera, all of that stuff is really basic because it supports all of the people in the family as well. And then from there, some of this stuff is just like, there's not some simple thing I can tell you around gut health. If you want to try a probiotic, I think that's amazing. If it doesn't work, there's a million more opportunities you can do to like manipulate what's going on there. It's just that it would be a disservice sometimes to tell people, I couldn't possibly like summarize it. I will say if fermented foods are not working for you, it's okay, right? They're really histamine producing as well. And so that's kind of why I have a job sometimes, is like some of the internet stuff is a little bit confusing. So I hope that was helpful. It was kind of a word vomit of opportunities or options, but always assess, do what you can, clean up the options that you can in general, and then kind of like reassess and see where you're at and ask for help when you need it.
Thank you for that. And I will say, I just finished working with a client. 6 months, we worked on her gut health, and she had eczema her whole life. And she didn't even tell me until the end. She's like, oh yeah, my eczema's gone. And I was like, what? She's like, yeah, it's been gone for months. And I was like, that's kind of a big deal, That's
Yeah, thanks for
crazy.
telling me. I always tell people to take, I always have them take baseline pictures because those photos are worth 1,000 words. And, something funny, you just work with people and you see things. It's like really normal for people to not take a photo when something improves because they're like, no, it's not a problem anymore. I'm like, no, just remember to take them every month because we'd like to see when it improves or if something goes wrong, et cetera. Like we want to, celebrate all of that. And it's so easy to not celebrate successes. And I think it's important to celebrate. Like it's been a learning curve for me as well, but it's very important for us to celebrate our clients and all the work that they're doing. So congrats to your client.
Absolutely. Yeah, I was thrilled. She was thrilled too, but I don't know. It's one of those things where it's like, I don't know, so many good things were happening for her, and she's just like, oh yeah, that's another thing that happened, by the way. I was like,
Yeah.
great. I love that for you.
Awareness and taking inventory of those symptoms, you get to see them disappear. Otherwise we sort of forget about things,
Right? I know. I always do a rundown at the end, and it's like, remember all the stuff you were dealing with? And they're like, oh my God, I forgot half of those things were happening because it was 6 months ago. So it's a good reminder of, like you said, celebrating them. All of your hard work has paid off. You are feeling better. You did incredible. We love to celebrate. So thank you again. Could you please let us know where we can find you, work with you? I know you have a podcast and a book. So do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Sure. You can find me at christabiegler.com. I have a hot take on the book. I got asked to write that maybe 6 years ago, and they wanted a cookbook, and they actually made me remove like 10,000 words because you're trying to solve everyone's problems. And so it's really a top 8 allergen and low histamine. So I'm not, if you want to do that, that's fantastic. But otherwise, I have a training that I just came out with on my website that I think is amazing, that talks through like the issues with the industry and the solutions. Part of it is that prioritizing and eczema typing, but there's several other things I get deeper into relapse prevention, et cetera. And so I'm really proud of that. So check that out if this episode was at all interesting to you. I think that one is amazing and great. And then I have a podcast called The Less Stressed Life if you want to come and be nerdy with me.
Thank you. I will link all of that in the show notes so we can find you, check out that cool resource. That does sound awesome and very relevant to what we talked about today. And your podcast too. I was actually listening to your podcast this morning, so go check that out. Thank you again for sharing all of your knowledge with us, your journey. I truly appreciate it. And I'm sure everyone really benefited from all this knowledge today.
Thank you so much for having me, Carly.
Did you learn something new and useful today? If the answer is a big, resounding hell yeah, do me a favor. Subscribe to this podcast. Even better, toss a rating in there too. It helps more bloated babes discover this show and lets me keep bringing you this free, gut-loving content every single week. And hey, don't be greedy. Share this episode with your bestie who's always unbuttoning her pants after dinner. She will love you even more for it. Thanks for hanging out with me and showing your gut some love. Keep on putting what you learn into practice, and you will be bloat-free in no time. Catch you in the next one. Bye!